Hello, everyone out there in podcast world. Hope you're having a great day. You are listening to or watching the Service Business Mastery Podcast. I'm your host, Tersh. Today, we have Mickie Kennedy on the show. We're going to talk about a little bit of strategy behind developing a press release, why we do it, and using that in our service business. As a service business owner, there are times when I wonder when I should use a press release. I hear that that's the thing to do, but I don't always understand everything behind that thought process. So I'm super excited to talk to Mickie today and hear what his business eReleases has in store for us, and so I can learn a little bit more about press releases and use it in our business. So with that being said, welcome to the show, Mickie.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. So tell us a little bit about eReleases and yourself to start with before we get started.
Okay. So about 25 years ago, I was working for a company. We were doing broadcast faxing of press releases. And my job was programming this fax machine with 100 numbers because that's all it could hold. Wow. And at the time we were sending to like 180 people. So I'd program it with 100, hit send, take almost all day to send. And then the next day I would delete and start over. And it was very ineffective. And I started to get calls from journalists saying, could you email that release over? We want to copy and paste a lot of the numbers and statistics which we published. And so a light bulb went off and I said, email releases, that's so much easier. So that was sort of what got me started with eReleases. I mentioned it to my boss, and that was a startup there. And he said, you should start that business. And so I took about a year contacting journalists and reaching out to them and asking if they'd received press releases from me. And they said yes. I think like all but just a few said yes at the time. Email was fairly new, and people were really excited to get relevant press releases. And over the years, we were contacted by PR Newswire and said, hey, why don't you also send your releases through us? And I said, well, my clients don't have $1,000 to send a release nationally through PR Newswire, because that's what they charge. Mm-hmm. And so we went back and forth. They looked at our customer base. They're not anyone their salespeople would ever be interested in reaching out to, because they're doing 3 or 4 releases a year on average, where their salespeople are looking for people that are doing 3 or 4 releases a month and can easily afford to spend $1,000 or more on a press release. But the big aha moment with them was when I went to their offices and meeting their editors and learning that they had an editorial team that was operating 24 hours a day. And they said that overnight there's not much going on, but they have to be there in case there's breaking news or a crisis or something. And a Fortune 500 company wants to send out a $10,000 multimedia release at 2 a.m. And so I said, rather than we sending our releases over and you scheduling for immediate distribution, why don't you queue them up and have your overnight staff work on them and set them up for the next business day. And so we tried to create a win-win situation there. There were no additional labor necessary for them to process our releases. And as a result, our pricing is between $200 for a new customer to a few $100s more than that, nowhere near $1,000 or more of what you would pay to go through PR Newswire directly. Originally, when I started the business, I did deal with someone who was in the HVAC industry. They had won a national award in their trade show, and they were based in DC. Mm-hmm. And they were looking for someone to write and send out a release. And at the time, I was just developing eReleases, and I told them, hey, this is something I'm working on, but I pawned him off on a few local PR firms, and he came back to me and said they all want big retainers. They don't want to work on one single release and send it out. They want to 6-month commitment, 1-year commitment. And so that's sort of how eReleases came into being, basically trying to help small businesses, startups, basically people who don't have a high threshold in the number of releases or announcements that are going to do, and they don't have the deep pockets where they can afford to go through a traditional newswire or use a PR firm, which is often much more expensive.
Yeah. So with that being said, how do like, do we have to do this national level? Like, or can you do just a local press release?
Right. Right. So you're able to do a local saturation with us. For example, if you're in a particular market, you're going to want to target locally there.
Mm-hmm.
But the national distribution is also included in every release, and it's really relevant for trade publications. For example, in your small geographic area, there's probably not a lot of regional trade publications, but the ones that are out there are national. So
Mm-hmm.
we add the local saturation to the release, so you're getting to your local media, newspapers, business publications, and things like that. But you're also getting that opportunity to go out nationwide. Trade publications are a place that people can really do well at. We have a local carpet company in New Jersey that I always use as an example. They contacted me and said, "What do you think our chances of getting media success are?" And I said, "Very small. It's hard to get media coverage." And we went through back and forth. Me asking him, "What's your USP, your unique selling proposition? What makes you different from all the other local carpet companies?" And they didn't have an answer. And so they said they had a budget and they wanted to commit to doing a press release a month for a year, which is a lot compared to our average customer of doing 3 or 4 a year. And on month 5, nothing had happened. And we started to have a conversation, brainstorm some more ideas. And it just came up that their biggest enemy was the big box home improvement stores. Mm-hmm. And they talked about what they do to have to market against them and educate and things like that. And so we did a press release around that and sent it out, and they got picked up in more than 10 floor trade publications. I wasn't aware that many existed. Wow. And several of them contacted us back and said, "We would love more press releases like this. This really excited our audience base." And what we had stumbled upon was a blind spot. In the floor trade industry, no one's talking about marketing. No one's talking about the difficulties and strategies of a local carpet company marketing against, say, home improvement stores like Home Depot and Lowe's.
Yeah.
And so what they said resonated with all of the subscribers, because that's basically most of the subscribers to these floor trade publications are local or even regional stores across the U.S. And we just continue to do more releases like that, and they just continue to get lots of pickup. They even got pickup in their local newspaper, as well as a New Jersey state magazine. And so what they did that was really smart was they put together this book of all their clippings. They printed them out in color, and they take that book with them when they give someone a floor quote. And they used to try to come in 1% to 3% less than what they think the big box home improvement stores are going to charge. And they then transition to say, we're not going to come in as low as like a Home Depot or Lowe's, but the padding that we use is much superior. The people who work for us as installers have worked with us for years. They're salaried. They get benefits. We know who's going to be installing your floor today and who will probably be installing your floor in 7 years. Home Depot and Lowe's doesn't know who's installing tomorrow or even next week. And you're dealing with just random people coming in and out of your home. And they would go through the book with the homeowner briefly and say, "We've been picked up by, floor trading today, this place, and just show them all this media exposure. They then would try to come in around 10% above what they thought was going to be the lowest bid. And they started winning about 20% more of those bids. They call their book the Big Brag Book of media clippings. And it's worked really effectively for them as a sales tool. And that was sort of what they had in mind when they started. They just didn't share that with me.
Yeah.
But eventually we got into, the right conversations to figure out what is strategic that we could say that their industry would resonate with. And for them, it was marketing. That was a blind spot. I don't know if it still is, because we cycle through releases occasionally and the pickup rate is a little bit lower. So I think that they're paying a little bit more attention A couple have actually added marketing blog columns to the publication. So even they recognize that this was a real opportunity. And so, getting back to strategy, figuring out what your industry is talking about or not talking about is relevant. If it's something that's hot going on in the industry, joining the conversation very often doesn't work because it's very competitive. Right. But if you can say something that's different or creates new layers on a current topic, that works really well. There's a lot in the construction industry right now about healthy buildings, and with the pandemic and everything going on, there's these certifications and things like that that are going on that are really big in industry. And if you join the conversation, you have something that talks about different layers or different takes on it. Like, for example, how would this affect, for example, community buildings or churches, or how would a small business who's making bagels be able to certify or address some of the these things that certification companies want, that would add $12,000 to $15,000 to the cost of their build out. And so,
is that more difficult? So joining the conversation is more difficult, or is that something you recommend doing?
I think it's a strategy that can work. You just have to play with it and figure out how you get your foot in the door. So if you feel like I have a really interesting take on this that people aren't talking about, that's a great opportunity. But if you're really struggling and feel like I could say this, but it's not really enhancing the conversation very much, then I would probably stay out of it for then. Another thing that works really well is being contrarian. So if everyone is focusing on these certifications and things like that, you might come in with the angle of, while this is great, this is out of the cost range for most small businesses, and here's a better use of their funds than going for the certification and the requirements there. Whenever you do come out with a contrarian viewpoint, which goes against what everyone else is saying, you want to be level-headed and reasonable. You don't want to come across
argumentative
as,
or
the crazy uncle in the HVAC industry or something like that.
Yeah, that's the concern that I have with anything pertaining to not really being different or disagreeing with things. But I mean, it's the internet, it's the age of the internet, and it's really easy to become a keyboard cowboy, or a keyboard warrior, you know what I mean? And say something as a comment on a blog post, and there's no repercussion on that. And so to say something that maybe isn't quote unquote mainstream thought process, it can be kind of daunting and scary at times.
It can be, but at the end of the day, I feel like if you are saying something that is reasonable and not over the top, I think it's an opportunity rather than a mistake. For example, electric cars are really hot and everybody talks about how it's better for the environment. But a contrarian approach might be, this is all good as a goal, but we're really not in a position yet where we should be adopting mass production of these cars because of the metals used in the batteries, and it creates its own environmental hazards, and then they have to be disposed of properly, and we don't have an infrastructure in place yet to handle that. And that's like, no one could really disagree with those, with that observation, but yet it's one that's not really put out there very much in the media. So, that is an opportunity where the media wants to cover all angles of something. If you're out there with the contrarian viewpoint, you'll find you'll get picked up a lot more readily than just going with the flow, because those opinions are harder to find, and they should be searching for those to complement what the flow is saying.
So do we, let's just use an air conditioning company in Savannah, Georgia. So do I have to tell you all of like our quote unquote trades publications, or is that something that you already have a way of figuring out?
We already have that. We have
Okay.
all of the publications at our disposal. We work with PR Newswire. We have access to their media database, which has pretty much everyone in it. And it also includes a lot of bloggers, as well as it's moving more towards social media influencers as well. For example, in the fashion arena, there are some Instagrammers who are more influential than the trade publications. And so the Newswire has done a really good job of being inclusive of people that don't necessarily fit your exact definition of a media outlet. And so that's growing and that's becoming more expansive. And I think we're beginning to look at media as hubs of influence. And in some instances, it's not a traditional publication. It's a person working from their home or wherever that may be. And it just so happens that they have cultivated an audience and they're in the same position as a journalist where they're acting as a gatekeeper and deciding what to share with their audience and what not to share. And that's a really big distinction that anybody who's approaching PR and press releases should do is, I'm writing this press release with the hopes it's turned into an article that helps me, but what is in this press release that would help the reader? What would the reader take away from it? Are they enlightened? Are they, titillated? Is there something that really speaks to them, whether it's knowledge or entertainment value and things like that? Another thing I hear from a lot of people, especially in the service industry, is I'm just not newsworthy. Like that carpet company in New Jersey, it's hard to come up with an idea. And one of the things that is my go-to is to focus on stats and statistics. The media loves data, and you can conduct a survey and publish the results, and the media will find it interesting. Generally, if you have 100 or more respondents, it's statistically relevant enough that the media will cover it. And one thing that you can do is you can either send a survey link to your customers or your followers on social media, but you can also partner with a local trade association. If there's a regional one or a small one, so many people focus on the big trade associations, but there's a lot of little small minor trade associations that have a good member base, but they're not doing much. And so they'll certainly send out the link to your survey to their members, especially if you are willing to co-brand them and tell them that you're doing a press release, you're moving over the Newswire. That creates a win-win for you where you've got instant credibility by aligning yourself with that trade association, and you also have access to their members. And one of the important things I always say with the surveys is to include 2 or 3 oddball questions. Sometimes they can be open-ended, like, what's the strangest thing you found in a toilet while out in repair, and just leave a field open and just collect those. Or, what's the strangest thing you found in an HVAC vent or something like that. And you can put together the top 10 strangest things, and that will be included in lots of articles. I see that a time and time again. While the statistics in the survey are interesting, there are certain ones that resonate more with readers, and readers find high entertainment value. And it's something that all the women's magazines know, because they have on the cover 69% of all men should be doing this in the bedroom, page 58. And then you see people standing in the line at the grocery store trying to get to page 58 to figure out what that is. So those kinds of things work really well, and the media knows that, and they'll incorporate that in the article. Often, these strange things can end up in the headline of the article that gets published.
That's really cool. So is there anything, I think it's probably my last question here, but is there anything that we should kind of really stay away from? Like what comes to mind is, I don't know, recently we purchased for the entire 4th grade of an elementary school, we purchased a book that they were reading. They only had enough copies so that they only had enough for one class at a time to read it. And they weren't able to take it home. The students didn't each have their own copy to take home because they had to have it for all of the class periods throughout the day. And so we just went through and bought the whole 4th grade these books. And it was an author called Harry Moon, and there's a chapter book, and it was a pretty thick hardback book. And we were told that, you need to do a press release on that, but I don't know how that's something that I would spin in a press release. I don't know how that would even work. So should I stay away from something like that? Or, so-and-so has got hired, like we all see that press release too.
Right.
Yeah.
So the new hire press releases generally don't do very well. They might get picked up in a trade publication and maybe a local newspaper. And that's like best case scenario, usually what happens. The outliers might be if someone's really well known in the industry, they might get a little more mileage out of it. But those are probably best for like LinkedIn and things like that. Or you yourself just sending the announcement to the key trade publication and one local newspaper rather than paying for a service like ours. Mm-hmm. In regards to the charitable donation that you did, it's frustrating because those press releases don't get a lot of media pickup. They don't have the sexiness or the excitement that sells very well. That being said, you could do the same approach with your local media. You could just put together a paragraph or two about what you did. Ideally, if you can get some images of the books or the classroom. I know it's always difficult with children and faces and things like that. So, whatever you can include would be great. And then forward that directly to the local newspaper, as well as like the patch.com if there's a local newspaper online as well. And that's something that you can sort of do yourself. And you may even want to share with your trade industry newsletter or publication as well. It works very well in your personal newsletter, creates goodwill, send it out to your customers, things like that, emails, put it on your blog and things like along those lines. But those things tend to not yield very well when you're sending out a press release over a newswire, because there is a considerable cost with the newswire. So you want to make sure that you're, as we used to say growing up, that you're hunting with the best weapon against what's out there, and that you're using your best stuff. There are opportunities, and a lot of it is sort of focusing on what you do that makes you unique. Does that resonate potentially with readers? Are there opportunities going forward for you to share important milestones? For companies that are in the service industry, they're not really creating new products or services. They may have, installation techniques, or they may do something that's just breathtaking. Sometimes you work on a property that just is amazing. And, something like that could also be something that you could reach out to local media and get their interest as well. There's a real estate section and other things like that. So they may want to cover something that's a little interesting, and they'll certainly include your name if you give them the story and put it in them. And a little bit of what we're talking about here is personal relationships. So I always say in those instances, rather than use a service like ours, try to develop a personal relationship with some people locally. For most companies, local media that are going to write about you or could potentially write about you is usually less than 10 people. At a newspaper, you can review it a few times and get a feel for who covers businesses like yours or businesses your size. And the same thing applies with an online presence, whether it's a writer at patch.com in your local area, as well as TV and radio. Do they have segments that sometimes spotlight local businesses? What are those segments? And then you just figure out who the producer or booker of that is, because it's usually never the host that you want to contact. Yeah. And then you just send them emails. You can ask for their email address, or you could do a search online. It's fairly easy to find people's email addresses these days, especially once you figure out how that publication structures whether it's first initial, period, then last name or something like that. You can figure it out, and then just introduce yourself and stay on top of it as you have milestones in your business or things that you feel are interesting. Just share them with that list of 10 people or less. And after a while, you should get some media coverage as a result of it. Also, if you notice something in your industry is becoming really trending, even if it's not relevant for you at this time, you could go ahead and share the tip with them. They'll appreciate it, and they'll probably remember you more next time you come with them with a real milestone of something that you did that you would like them to ultimately cover.
Cool. So I think you've answered pretty much all the questions that I have anyways. I'm sure there's other questions for the people who are listening to this or watching it. Where's the best place for them to reach out to you or to your team to get connected or use your services?
Okay. So our website's eReleases.com, and our social media, I think, is on the lower right. And I have a free masterclass that I put together that just talks about press release strategies. I recommend everyone take it. It's less than an hour. You'll know more than 80% of PR firms because they're the ones pushing these mediocre press releases that we see. And that's at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN. And I would just tell anyone who has always felt like they're not newsworthy, you can be, and you just have to be a little creative. And but if you're willing to do the work and carve it out, you can get some considerable traffic and links to your website that will improve your SEO, as well as that carpet company I mentioned. You can take those clips and share them on your website. You can share them with your customers. You can take them when you do a quote or develop a brochure or something like that. And you just get instant credibility, and you have this authority that any other person's not going to have. And people are willing to pay a premium for that.
Awesome, Mickie. I appreciate it. I mean, I've got 3-4 pages of notes here. I was taking notes the whole time, even though I can listen to this again. I really do appreciate everything that you've brought to us and shared with us. Definitely going to check it out. Check out your plans, that course online. I was having a senior moment there for a second. No, I really appreciate everything that you've done for us here today, and I look forward to talking to you again here in the future. If anybody has any questions that's listening to or watching this episode, don't hesitate to reach out to Mickie and his team. Don't hesitate to reach out to me as well, Tersh at ServiceEmperor.com. And until we talk again next week, I hope you have a wonderful and safe week. And thank you again for listening to the Service Business Mastery Podcast. This podcast focused on service business owners, managers, and technicians who are considering becoming business owners. Our goal with this podcast is to help answer some unasked questions, and I hope that that's what we did today. I hope Mickie, I know he helped answer some questions that I had that I didn't even know I had, so I hope he answers some of your questions as well. Thank you again, Mickie.